This video has a like goal. Helping this video achieve it will grant you something just as spectacular as the One Piece treasure. Full details will be at the end of the video. Hey guys, how you doing? This is Mango etc. and I'm here today to bring you another One Piece What If Ace, Sabo and Luffy all joined under the same crew part 5. And now this is where I strongly recommend going back and checking out the other parts if you haven't already, because right now we have 2 Straw Hat members who are no longer present with us, and you might be wondering why that is. And the only way to find out clearly and effectively is to go back and rewatch or watch for the first time the parts that you have missed. But with that said, I am now going to dive into part 5. So we start things off with Luffy attempting to draw a Jolly Roger for the crew, but it turns out looking horrible. However, using Luffy's as a template, Sabo is able to design something that everybody likes. So now I think that the new Jolly Roger for the ASL Pirates will be similar to the one for the Straw Hat, but it will have a slight difference. On the hat, instead of just being a straw hat, a third of the hat will represent Ace, Luffy and Sabo. So a straw hat, the orange hat that Ace has, and then the blue, more serious looking hat that Sabo has. So after painting the new Jolly Roger on all the flags and the sails of the ships, Zoro, Ace and Sabo are all exhausted. However, Luffy is still full of energy and thinks to himself, I want to try out the new cannons that we got on this ship. So they find a nearby rock, and then between all of them, they all take shots at this rock. None of them are not too great at it. You do get a good few shots here and there, but nobody is able to hit the rock that they were aiming at. So now sitting in this kitchen of the new ship, the crew's debating who's going to cook for them. And this is when Johnny ends up on the ship and calling everybody out. This time everybody comes out, not just Luffy. So Zoro recognizes Johnny more quickly than he does within the original story, and this avoids a fight breaking out on the merry-go. So Zoro asks for Yasaku, and Johnny explains that he is sick. Luckily, Sabo is familiar with the symptoms of scurvy and knows what to do. Both Luffy and Zoro praise him for this, but Zoro replies that this is basic knowledge and they should really consider getting a doctor. So in Yasaku's moment of clarity, he explains that both he and Johnny are both bounty hunters and Zoro used to work with them. Back to realizing that they are hungry, talk goes into who is cooking. Johnny also gets wrapped up within this argument, with Ace suggesting that he should cook, considering that they just saved his friend's life. Johnny suggests that he knows a place where they can get a bite to eat, as well as potentially find a new chef for their crew. They like the sound of that and leave it to Johnny to lead the way to the Baratie. So 3 days later, they arrive at the Baratie, and just like in the original story, they still bump into the Marine Captain Full Body. Not recognizing the Jolly Roger, he will address the ship asking who is the captain, to which Ace, Luffy and Sabo will respond. He soon forgets about talking to Ace, Sabo and Luffy when he recognizes Johnny and Yasaku. He insults them as usual, calling them 2-bit bounty hunters. This still angers them and they still start a fight with Full Body, but lose just as quickly. Captain Full Body still tries to sink the ship with a cannonball, but Luffy still misdirects it with a Gumma Gumma balloon, which ends up hitting the Baratie. So we skip over to the Baratie and Captain Full Body is still on his date. This is where we meet Sanji for the first time, and he still makes a fool out of him, leaving Captain Full Body feeling pretty embarrassed. At the same time, Ace, Luffy and Sabo have come to apologize to Zeph. Ace will say that he is willing to pay for the damages done to the Baratie, to which Zeph will say that he wants 100 million berries. This will trigger an argument between the two of them because Ace will feel like he is being overcharged, to which Zeph will say yeah, the rest is simply for compensation. Ace will respond saying that he isn't paying it, and this is where Sabo will chime in. Sabo will calmly suggest what if Luffy works off his debt, to which Zeph will say he has to work here for a year. This triggers another argument between the two, Ace and Zeph. At the same time, downstairs things are escalating between Sanji and Captain Full Body. Along comes Patty, who is confused and demands an explanation from Sanji. Sanji drops Full Body, who then threatens to have the Baratie closed down. This pisses off Sanji yet again, who goes back to attack Full Body again, but is promptly stopped. This is where Zeph, Luffy, Sabo and Ace come falling down from above. The chefs will quickly ask Zeph to defuse the situation, to which Zeph will quickly grasp. He will kick Sanji before kicking Captain Fullbody out of his restaurant. A member of Captain Fullbody's team comes in to report the escape of Jin before he himself appears, killing the Marine and heading to the Bratty demanding food. Patty proceeds to serve Jin, but when realizing Jin has no intention of paying, he attacks Jin. This is where Ace gets his first shine into Patty. When Captain Fullbody leaves, Patty continues to attack the defenseless Jin. Sanji still cooks and brings food to Jin, to which he quickly stuffs down with no hesitation, calling it the best food that he has ever had. Luffy still oversees all of this and claims to himself that he has found the cook that he is looking for his crew. Luffy shouts down to Sanji and asks him to join his crew. Luffy, Sanji and Jin go to talk about why Luffy ended up in his predicament and about Zeph and the rest of the chefs that work on the Baratie, basically hinting that any one of them would be suited to be a cook on the pirate ship. Sanji goes on to decline the offer to join the ASL pirates, but Luffy is adamant. During the argument, Jin butts in and warns Luffy to stay away from the Grand Line. Back in the Baratie, Patty and the rest of the chefs are talking about what Patty did to Jin and the repercussions that might follow. However, Patty isn't worried about this and tells anybody who is scared to leave the Baratie while they still can. Zeph comes in telling everybody to get back to work. This is where a change will occur. After he says this, he will address Ace, who has been in the kitchen the whole time. Ace will reply that he's scouting out a potential cook for his crew. Zeph will ask him to leave immediately, to which he will oblige. Meanwhile, outside, Luffy tells Jin thanks for the warning, but he's still going to the Grand Line. Luffy and Jin will say their goodbyes and Zeph will come to get Luffy to put him to work. Luffy makes a big mess in the kitchen until he is asked to take orders instead. Upon starting this task, he sees his crew at a table. This is where another change will occur because Nami is no longer present. Sanji won't go over to flirt. After Zoro makes Luffy drink his own bogey, Zeph will come out and demand Luffy get back to work. Sabo will start a convo about really waiting a year for Luffy, to which Ace will respond they won't have to. It won't even be a week before Zeph is begging us to take Luffy back off their hands. Meanwhile, Jin has made his way back to Don Krieg and tells him he will take him to the Baratie. Zeph and Sanji still argue about Sanji leaving, to which he says that he will never leave. As Zeph walks away, Luffy says to Sanji that seeing as how he's not wanted here, he should join his crew. The ASL pirates go back to their meal while Sanji goes back to flirting with the ladies, the other customers on the ship. After a while, he comes back to the ASL pirates table to get Luffy, who has been slacking off. During the 2 days before the return of Jin, Ace has been working on getting Patty to join his crew. Also, Saba has taken a liking to Carney and tries to get him to join the crew. So 2 days later, Don Krieg has arrived. There is panic on the Baratie amongst the customers and the chefs. The only panic coming from the merry-go is coming from Johnny and Yasuku. Zoro is also present on the merry-go, just so you know. Jin brings in Don Krieg, who begs for food on his behalf. Rightly so, Patty doesn't want to feed him and suggests they should call the Marines so he is captured. This is something that customers and the other chefs agree with. However, Don Krieg says he won't do any harm if he gets some food, and he even begs a little. In comes Sanji with a plate of food and some drink for Don Krieg. He kicks Patty out of the way before handing over the food and the drink. Carney begs Sanji to take it away before it's too late, warning Sanji of Don Krieg's reputation. However, it is too late. As soon as Don Krieg regains his strength, he attacks Sanji, shocking everyone, including Jin. Jin pleads with his captain not to do this before Don Krieg claims that he will be taking the Baratie for himself. Not only does he want the Baratie, but he wants the chefs to prepare food and water for all his men still aboard his ship. Sanji is more than happy to oblige, claiming that his job as a chef is to serve hungry people, but the other chefs aboard are not happy with his attitude and attempt to stop him. After attacking Sanji, Patty continues with attacking Don Krieg with a cannonball. The blast sends him flying, but because of his armor, it does no damage to him. As he gets back up, the chefs attempt to attack Don Krieg and quickly find out that his armor is loaded with weapons. After demanding what he wants again, in comes Zeph with the stuff for Don Krieg's crew. Don Krieg is familiar with the guy standing before him and refers to him as Red Zeph. He goes on about Zeph's past before claiming he also wants his logbook that has details of the Grand Line, but Zeph refuses to give this up. Don Krieg will go on to talk about how great of a pirate he is and that the only reason why he met disaster on the Grand Line was due to lack of information. The chefs will claim that he is not getting the logbook or the Baratie. This will annoy Don Krieg further before he goes on to shout about how that he will get everything he'll want, gather stronger forces before going on to claim the One Piece. This is where Luffy butts in and says that he will be the one to get the One Piece. Don Krieg stares down Luffy, asking him if he wants to take back what he said, but obviously Luffy will say no. So instead of Zoro and Usopp being present on the Baratie, it is Ace and Sabo instead. They are talking about going to the Grand Line and that no matter how bad it is out there, they'll tough it out because they ain't as weak as Don Krieg. Luffy is shocked to see his bros. Don Krieg starts laughing at both Ace, Sabo and Luffy, saying that they don't know what they're talking about, don't know what they're getting into, and that even with his crew of 5,000 men, he didn't even last 7 days on the Grand Line. This shocks the chef, but it entices both Ace and Sabo to go there even more. Annoyed with all the talk, Don Krieg picks up the food for his crew and makes his way, telling them that as he leaves, not to be present when he returns. Anyone present when he does, he will kill. He just wants the ship and the logbook. Jin apologizes again for his captain's behavior. The chefs blame Sanji for the predicament that they are in, but this vexes Zeph, who tells them to shut up and asks them do any of them know what true hunger is. He also mentions to them that this is their chance to leave, but all the chefs say that they want to stay to defend the Baratie. Jin is shocked that they're all going to stay and fight. Ace, Luffy and Sabo will have a little debate amongst themselves, saying that all the chefs on the Baratie are fairly impressive and discuss which ones that they want to join their crew. Jin is asked why he lied about knowing about the Grand Line. This is where Jin reveals that Krieg's fleet was taken out by one man, shocking everybody present. Zeph confirms that based on Jin's description that the person is Mihawk. Ace, Sabo and Luffy discuss amongst themselves who Mihawk is, but none of them know. Sanji asks Jin what did they do to make Mihawk want to attack them, but Jin doesn't know the answer to this. Zeph suggests that maybe they interrupted his nap. Taking this as a joke, Jin shouts back at Zeph, but Zeph replies that this is just typically the kind of behavior that you can expect on the Grand Line. Upon hearing this, Ace, Luffy and Sabo are even more excited about going to the Grand Line. Sanji will call them fools for wanting to go there and say that they'll all end up dead within no time. Ace will respond saying that having the courage to pursue their dreams does not make them fools. Luffy will also chime in saying that he will be joining them anyway. Again, Sanji will call them once again fools. Patty interjects, reminding everybody that right now on Don Krieg's ship, everybody's probably eating and getting ready to attack. Aboard the ship, this is exactly what is happening. With his crew now full, Don Krieg suggests going back to the Grand Line. But having just survived an encounter with the Grand Line, some of the crew members are doubting the words of their captain. Don Krieg sees this doubt and shoots one crew member dead to make an example out of them. This gets the rest of the crew on board as Don Krieg commands them. However, as Don Krieg is about to attack the Baratie, something causes a big commotion outside. Ace, Sabo and Luffy run outside to check on the merry-go, which has Zoro, Johnny and Yasuko on board. Zeph orders one of the chefs to drop the anchor to keep the Baratie from capsizing. Ace, Sabo and Luffy reach outside to see the merry-go is fine. Shortly after this, Mihawk arrives revealing himself. Don Krieg and his crew are both shocked and scared. The chefs comment on how he looks like a regular person, but Zeph quickly puts them straight. Zoro is shocked to be in close proximity of the guy he has been searching for. A member of Don Krieg's crew starts shouting at Mihawk, asking why did he attack them, to which Mihawk replies it was simply for fun. This angers the crew member, so he starts to shoot at him. However, this is ineffective. From here, everything plays out just like it does within the original story, with Zoro challenging and fighting Mihawk. Everybody is shocked. Sanji shouts out to Zoro about abandoning your dreams. Johnny, Yasuko, and Sabo dive into the sea to save Zoro. Luffy still attempts to attack Mihawk, this time accompanied by Ace, who hitched a ride on Luffy. Luffy still crashes upon entry, but Ace hots off in time and immediately attacks Mihawk. Not interested in fighting, Mihawk casually dodges his efforts before telling them both he didn't kill Zoro. Johnny, Sabo, and Yasuko surface with Zoro, but this time he is brought back to the merry-go as it would be slightly closer. Mihawk will still have his speech to Zoro, and this time will ask Luffy and Ace their goal, with Luffy answering for both of them. Mihawk still tells them that their goals are hard, to which Luffy will respond that he doesn't care what he thinks. Zoro comes through and still has his speech, this time addressing Ace and Sabo as well. After the speech, Mihawk is impressed and starts to make his exit. Don Krieg tries to stop him, but with no interest in Don Krieg anymore, he takes his leave without doing any more harm. With Mihawk gone, Don Krieg goes back to his original plan. Luffy makes his way back over to the Baratie with Ace and asks Zeph if he helps get rid of Don Krieg, can you stop working for him? Zeph says sure, but no one from your crew can intervene. Luffy agrees to these conditions. So from here, pretty much things are the same until the end of the arc, with slight differences. Luffy starts things off with Team Baratie by taking out some of the further members of Krieg's crew. Shortly after, Carney and Patty arrive in their weapon, the Mackerel Head, and proceed to attack Don Krieg, but this is unsuccessful. At the same time, the friends of the Baratie are deployed, giving everyone more fighting space. Krieg's crew climb onto the Baratie and attack, but the chefs have them covered. Don Krieg throws Mackerel Head towards the Baratie. Sanji kicks out of the way, displaying his awesome kicking strength for the first time. Carney and Patty shout at Sanji, saying that he could have killed both of them while lining up to join the fight. Don Krieg's crew talk trash, but some of the chefs have been defeated by them. Patty and Carney yell at the chefs for being defeated. Patty and Carney join the fight and overwhelm the further members of Don Krieg's crew. So now in turns Pearl, who takes out Carney and Patty in one hit. A member of Don Krieg's crew tries to steal Patty's knife while he is down, but he grabs on and holds on for his dear life. This angers Sanji, who then joins the fight, taking out multiple further members of the crew. A quick speech between Pearl and Sanji let us know that Sanji doesn't use his hands in battle and that Pearl is invincible and has never lost a drop of blood. Don Krieg attacks Luffy, sending him flying into Pearl. Sanji vs Pearl starts. Luffy crashing into Pearl causing him to bleed, which worries his crew, including Don Krieg. They beg him to calm down, with everybody else confused by the situation, but despite their pleas, it doesn't work. Pearl doesn't calm down and he engages a safety mechanism and lights himself on fire. Now on fire, Pearl continues to attack, but is now the added danger of burning down the Baratie. However, despite the fire, Sanji is still willing to fight, claiming that what kind of cook would he be if he was afraid of fire. However, hitting him and making him bleed makes him panic even more. He shoots out fire pearls, but Zeph defends these with ease. Don Krieg, choosing the Baratie over his crew, decides the best thing to do right now is to sink Pearl along with the Fins, so he attempts to do so, only to have Luffy intervene. Luffy bounces back Don Krieg's attack, causing it to break the mast on Don Krieg's ship. The mast then falls, hitting Pearl on the head. Jin then calls out to Sanji, holding Zeph at gunpoint. With no hesitation on his part, Luffy is ready to lay out Jin as he uses Zeph as a bargaining chip to make Sanji and the chefs give up. In order to save Zeph, Sanji asks Sanji to point the gun at him instead. Jin doesn't move but questions Sanji why he would go to such lengths. Pearl gets back up and sends Sanji flying with one punch. Luffy moves to hit Pearl, but Sanji orders him to stop. When Luffy asks Sanji why he allowed himself to be hit, he answers so Jin won't shoot Zeph. Sanji goes on to talk about why he is willing to go so far to protect the Baratie for Zeph because it's his most prized possession. Pearl continues to beat down on Sanji as he starts to flashback. So via Sanji's thoughts, this is where the Sanji flashback would come into things. After the Sanji flashback is done, this is where Sanji would get back up and claim that he's not handing over the Baratie or let Zeph die. Everyone watches on as Sanji continues to get wailed on by Pearl. The fire continues to spread. Luffy gets angry and takes out the fins of the Baratie with a gum axe. Krieg thinks Luffy is up to something, so orders Jin to shoot Zeph. Luffy and Sanji get into an argument about what Luffy just did and why he done it, and how Sanji should have found another way to repay his debt to Zeph rather than letting himself die. Pearl attempts to attack Sanji again, but Jin intervenes, ending Pearl within one hit. Jin apologizes to Krieg and says he wants to finish Sanji off personally. Luffy and Sanji will trash talk Jin, which annoys further members of Don Krieg's crew. They shout insults back while also bigging up themselves. They want to attack Luffy, but Don Krieg tells them to stand down. Don Krieg asks Luffy out of the two of them which one of them is Pirate King material, to which Luffy responds, me obviously. This annoys Don Krieg and he deploys and fires what he tells them is a poison gas bomb. Before the members get the gas mask, chefs dive into the sea while Luffy approaches the bomb, ready to knock it into the sea. However, it turns out to be a shuriken bomb, catching Luffy off guard. As Luffy complains about the pain and that it wasn't poison, Don Krieg laughs and responds they are not worth the poison, that he has many ways to kill all of them before asking Luffy again who is worthy to be Pirate King. Obviously, Luffy gives the same answer. Me. This is where Don Krieg will order Jin to kill Sanji and leave Luffy to him. Sanji vs Jin starts with everyone watching on. Luffy thinks he spots an opening and attacks Don Krieg, but Don Krieg sees him coming and fires his weapon, keeping Luffy at bay, eventually making him have to retreat back to where he was originally standing. Sanji vs Jin continues when things are not looking good for Sanji. It looks like Jin is going to deliver the finishing blow when all of a sudden he starts crying, saying to his captain that he can't do it because of how well Sanji treated them. Of course this angers Don Krieg and he tells Jin what a disappointment he is. Jin responds saying that he is sorry and also asks if they can spare the beret. This further angers Don Krieg, including members of the crew saying what a disappointment their battle commander is. This time Craig prepares the poison gas bomb for real. Craig says Jin is out of the crew, but further members of the crew talk about Jin's previous loyalty, and we also learn about how Jin ended up in the hands of Captain Full Body. Luffy tries to prevent Craig from firing him, but again he is stopped from reaching him before he retreats back to where he was. Luffy tells Jin to stop listening to Don Krieg and that he is going to clobber him. Despite being betrayed by his captain, Jin still defends him and accepts his death for defying his captain's orders. Don Krieg fires the poison bomb, his crew members put on masks, the chefs dive under the sea, those in the Baratie run inside as well as those in the merry-go. Luffy manages to steal 2 masks and throws them to Sanji and Jin, but by the time he is ready to steal one for himself, they've all dived into the sea. Luffy panics, but a mask prepares at the last moment for him. The bomb goes off, and after 5 minutes the air is clear again. This is where we learned that the mask Luffy received was Jin's mask. Jin held down Sanji with the mask to his face while he took the forefront of the poison. Don Krieg laughs at the suffering of Jin, which vexes both Sanji and Luffy. Don Krieg goes on to say it's good that he killed him just in case he betrayed him again. The further members of the crew look on in surprise. Sanji screams to Patty to get some sort of antidote, to which Patty will yell back they don't have any, plus why should they help an enemy? Seth intervenes in the convo, telling them to grab one of the masks as it should have traces of the antidote and that it should take him to the upper levels of the Baratie so that he can take in deep breaths of fresh air. Sanji puts on the mask before calling over to Patty and Carney. They come over to carry him away, but this is where Luffy speaks to Jin, telling him to not die and live to spite Don Krieg. Even after all of this, Jin is still singing Don Krieg praise. So this is where Luffy vs Don Krieg will begin, with everybody watching on. The fight would play out more or less the same way it does within the original story, but we need to remember this is a slightly weaker Luffy, so I think it will take a few more hits before breaking the battle spear and also breaking Don Krieg's armor. The fight still ends with Luffy falling into the sea, and as he is potentially closer, Ace dives in to fish him out. Because of this change, Sanji does not learn about the weakness of the fruit users. Jin is surprised Don Krieg lost and gets up to leave, although Patty and Carney suggest against it. Ace brings Luffy back to the Baratie just as Don Krieg regains consciousness. His crew try to calm him down but have no luck. Sanji is just about to move to knock him back out when Jin does it before him. Jin rounds up his crew and tells them that they are leaving. Jin goes on to say he wants to spend what little time he has left as a pirate and that he hopes to meet Luffy again on the Grand Line. Sanji orders Patty and Connie to give Jin their supply boat, to which they are not happy to do at first, but in the end they end up obeying this command. Luffy comes through looking for his hat. Sanji is there to let him know what has transpired while he has been sleeping. Luffy remembers the deal he made with Zeph before asking Sanji again to join his crew, but Sanji is still refusing. He goes on to mention now it's not the time for him to leave because he can't depend on other chefs to look after the Baratie and Zeph. Sanji then goes on to talk about the All Blue. Zeph can also be seen here in this conversation. While that's happening, Ace meets up with Patty to encourage him to join the crew, but Patty tells him that he sees himself as too old to be starting a pirate's life. At this time, he's more focused on settling down, finding a wife, and having some kids. Ace accepts this response before Patty respectfully declines the offer one more time before walking off. Zeph joins Ace and suggests that they should take Sanji with them. Ace responds saying that he doesn't mind as he would be a great asset, but he knows Sanji won't come due to his loyalty to Zeph. Zeph says don't worry about that as he has a plan. The eating scene with all the chefs happens as normal, the only difference is that Ace is not present. As Sanji walks out, Ace will comment to Zeph, was this the plan that he mentioned earlier? Zeph will confess that all that was said was in order to make Sanji leave. Being on the other side of the door, however, Sanji still hears all of this. So at this moment within the original story, Yasuko comes crashing back into Sanji and then the Baratie, but as he doesn't go off to pursue Nami, this doesn't happen. After a while of sitting outside for a bit, he goes back in and tells Luffy and Ace that he will join their crew. Both are all smiles about this information. Sanji would then go on to tell the chefs that he heard everything that they were saying previously. So within the original story, Sanji has this little boat that they used to get to Arlong Park, but because he feels like he doesn't need it no more, plus he feels like he owes them for letting Jin take the supply boat, he lets the chefs of the Baratie keep his boat. However, the merry-go is still filled up with food. Sanji has a final reminisce before making his heartfelt exit and goodbye. Upon boarding the merry-go, Sanji is greeted by Sabo, who mentions it's a good thing Sanji joined the crew as he failed to get Kanye to do the same. Luffy asks how Zoro is, to which Johnny will respond he is fine and resting. Ace has a speech claiming that after all the talk they heard about the Grand Line, that he can't wait to go there any further. They will make one final stop to make sure that they are well prepared and then they are heading off to the Grand Line, to which everyone will smile in agreement before sailing off on their next adventure. Alrighty, so let's talk about the like goal. So I was thinking if we can get 10 likes within the first week, then I will have the next part out the week after that. So just so there's no confusion, I'll have all the dates displayed on the screen. So yeah, let's see if we can hit this like goal. And this is where I'm going to leave this part off. So my question for this part really is, would you have preferred if Patty or Carney joined the crew? Upon rereading this arc, I actually came to find myself liking those two characters more than I initially remember liking them upon reading it for the first time or just watching it for the first time. So it's for that reason I did have the kind of tease that it could potentially be one of those two joining the crew instead of Sanji. So would you have preferred that? Or are we all down for having, the main cook, the best cook at the end of the day of One Piece world joining the crew? I think I made the best choice at the end of the day. But like always, guys, I'm asking for your thoughts and opinions. If you haven't already, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. But most importantly, take care. Have a nice day.